day 2 of the IAAPA Expo 2022, and we are with Scott Voyles. He's a designer with RMC. Scott, what do you design?
Well, roller coasters, big, fast roller coasters. I'm a structural designer, so I detail out lots of little parts and pieces. Anything between the track and the foundations, my responsibility, making all the fab drawings, and then all the installation drawings, construction drawings, getting all that shipped to site and installed in the right spot. And
sounds like a lot
my
involved
job.
there.
Yep.
Yeah, it seems like RMC has really taken the industry by storm. They're actually rebirthing a bunch of old wooden coasters. I've always been curious. So when you're dealing with an existing structure, like let's say Wildcat at Hershey Park, what does it take to actually use that structure and then create a new structure that's safe, sound, efficient, and not completely tearing it out?
Yeah, so there are definitely some complications. The first thing is just the size of the ride. Mm-hmm. If it's say a medium-sized ride, maybe like a Wicked Cyclone or a Joker, it's a little bit easier. The loads on the structure are quite a bit less, so it makes it a little bit easier to use the existing structure. For something like your Steel Vengeance, or your, especially like an Iron Gwazi, or even like Hershey Park, is going to have some of the same complications because we are going taller, we're going faster. We end up having to pour a lot of new foundations to help out the ride. But we are trying to use as much of the existing structure as possible. That's always been the idea. It helps keep the cost low. But you don't know really until you get onto the job site what the condition of the wood is. Sometimes you end up removing a lot more than you anticipated, just because the quality of the existing wood isn't up to par. But with these big, fast rides, the loads on the structure is just very large, so it does kind of complicate the engineering and the design, and you'll see a lot of like steel pipe batters on this structure to help with like wind loading, and it's just a really efficient way to get load to the ground without adding a bunch of new wood structure.
Well, Scott, as you're designing roller coasters for RMC, do you prefer the ground floor up where you get to start from scratch, or taking an existing structure and then trying to see if you can make magic with it?
I would say personally, I like the design problems that we see in remodeling an existing ride. Mm-hmm. And I think even the engineers that are doing the ride layout for us prefer something along that line as well. I mean, if you're going from ground up, it's such a blank slate. You don't really know what to do exactly. If you have an existing ride, there's already like some parameters to work with, and it starts to suggest some of the stuff that could happen. It suggests some potential as you're designing. So I think it really helps kind of the creativity, having something to work with, having some of those constraints. Whereas a blank slate, it's like you almost don't know where to start. There's nothing to work with.
So one of the most anticipated rides coming to the industry in the coming months is going to be AerieForce One at Fun Spot Atlanta. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
Sure. So that one is a ground up. It's going to be a steel structure, angle iron, framed similar to our wood structures, but it's all steel. One of our large steel lift trusses. It's got a big Raven turn and stall for those first elements, and then lots of airtime hills, and even kind of a unique little jump over their arcade onto that backside. So some kind of unique elements that we haven't done before, and I think it's going to be a sort of a great banner for the park, just being like right there on the highway. It's going to be very iconic, visible. So it's going to be a good ride. Awesome.
You know, yesterday the unveil of the Wildcat Revenge coaster. It's going to be at Hershey Park. Talk about this. I mean, this is amazing. Just the detail, and that's going to be a great visual for photos and video and everything that's coming down the drops and around the turns and that. Talk about this.
Sure. So we've gotten a lot of compliments on the artistic portion of the train. I think they did a really good job with the theming, and the gentleman that does the actual like fiberglass work with us, I think executed very well. I think everybody's really happy with it. Did the unveiling on Tuesday, first day of the show. Had a really good turnout for that. I think everybody's excited for the ride. This is going to be another steel lift truss. It's got a underflip element, which is one of my personal favorite elements, so I'm excited for that. And it's actually the world's largest underflip. But it's a really tight site for the most part, and it's just going to create a lot of like interesting pass-throughs through the structure. It's going to be another just intense fast ride.
Yeah, it looks great.
Thank you.
So I'm not sure if you could directly speak to this, and obviously every situation is different, but generally speaking, if a park is exploring either converting an old wood coaster to a hybrid or building ground up, is there a cost advantage to either one?
I wish I knew the numbers a little bit more. I'd say there's definitely some advantages. There's some pros and cons to both. I mean, obviously, if we can reutilize a bunch of the existing structure, that's going to save some money. There's a lot less foundations to pour if they're already existing. So just some of like the volume of work, obviously, there's a little bit less if you're doing a remodel versus a ground up. But there's some ambiguity, I guess, in doing a remodel. Like I said, you're not exactly sure if the wood's in good condition, so I may have detailed some of the structure to be one way, they decide they can't use it, and now I've got to go back and remake drawings. So you've got to kind of be on your toes for a remodel, where if it's a ground up, I know what to expect, I know where the foundations are going to end up, I know what the structure is going to be. I can do it once, it's going to be done, and I know it's going to be right. So
you mentioned a couple times that you generally make, I guess, let's call them assumptions as to what wood you can use and what wood you can't. So walk us through that process. Is that something like your engineers, your field engineers get on site and then they look at something and you're like, okay, this is not going to cut it. They send it back to the drawing board, back to you. Is that how that works?
So the structure, when we very first start, we're going to define sort of where we think the existing structure will stop and where the new one will begin. And that structure will get analyzed in that manner. When our construction crews show up onto the job site and they actually start sawing the lumber, they're going to make a judgment call of whether or not that lumber is good. And they're going to report back to us, say, hey, we got to tear all this out. And that's not a problem from engineering, because the way that we would detail out that structure is a lot stronger than what is existing anyway. So it's not necessarily a problem from an engineering standpoint. It's really just the cost of the new lumber.
You know, Scott, if I'm at a park and I come to you, and let's say I've got a wood coaster, it's about 3,800 feet long, and I say we want to do this conversion. From the time that you get approached to the ride being, completed with the construction, what is that turnaround time?
I'd say maybe just over a year. A lot of times what happens is the parks are kind of waiting to see what their budgets are going to be for the year and whether or not they can take on a project. If they've already reached out to us and we have a proposal and we can just move on it, it's going to be pretty quick. But generally, let's say I'll go out and survey in the spring for a ride, hand that to engineering, they'll do the ride layout, the structural analysis. We're going to start fabricating probably middle of the summer. So that process maybe takes a couple of months to do the engineering. We'll be designing for about 4 months, fabricating until about January, and I mean they always want the ride open in the spring, so it's kind of a spring to spring rotation. It really just kind of depends on where they've reached out to us, when they reached out to us, and how many iterations of the proposal we go through.
Okay. Scott, one of the biggest things that RMC has announced, and everyone always talks about it, everyone always speculates about, is the T-Rex.
Yep.
So my question for you, if you can answer, is where are you guys in that project? Are you looking for a buyer at this point, or is it still being engineered? Is it still a concept? Like, where does it sit right now?
I think we want to have the right interest in that. So if a client comes to us and expresses some interest in doing, say, a 300-foot tall coaster or something like that, I think that's where that track would come in. Right now, the remodels and the Raptor tracks are doing real well for us, so we haven't necessarily spent the time to develop the T-Rex past sort of a concept. But if we had the right interest in it, we would absolutely start developing the new trains, the track, the structural system. and start adding some more detail to that.
Is the track generally based off of the single rail track?
For the T-Rex, yeah, it's going to be a single rail. It's going to be similar to the Raptor, just large.
Awesome. So, and it seats 2 across, right?
I don't know if that's necessarily been defined yet. I think it could be many different things. Yeah.
That's why we ask these questions, because we make assumptions that are not correct sometimes. But that's really cool. Yeah, that's been a really exciting thing, and I think that you will have the right biter, shall we say, at the right time. So generally speaking, though, your goal with that is to have the taller, faster kind of situation. You want to have the Giga, the tall Hyper, that kind of thing. Am I correct with that, or are there other elements that are unique to the T-Rex track?
I would imagine that it would be able to do some of the same things that these other rides do. We are changing the center of gravity, so the ride dynamics potentially are going to be different, and then just depending on what we feel is going to be the best design for the train, whether are we doing side by side, are we doing 4 across, are we doing 6 cars, 10 cars. I mean, none of that's really been defined, but a lot of that changes the ride experience and what you're able to do. So we'll kind of see what happens, I guess, with the T-Rex.
Awesome.
A lot of potential still.
All right, well, Scott, thanks for your time. RMC,
absolutely.
Where can they find you on the website and social media?
I should know this. RockyMTNConstruction.com is the website. If you guys see anything at the show, our hashtag is RMCit.
RMCit, okay. Okay. So anyone in the industry, make sure you reach out to Rocky Mountain Construction. You know who they are, you know what they do. Who's out there? Who's going to bite on that T-Rex? Who's going to top AerieForce One? Who's going to have the next great conversion? All great questions, which will probably be answered in the next few years. But Scott, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you,
Scott.
Thank you. It was awesome. Thank you.